welcome you here in person, that we're having a live event this morning, and I've got a few people to thank. So first I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Jessie Schmidt with the Better Business Bureau, and I'm the state director here in South Dakota. Our partners for this event are Sdn Communications, and we're so grateful to them. Nikki, Vernon, and the entire team at Sdn, we're grateful to have you all here with us this morning, but we know what a critical role you play in this event, and then obviously as you serve your clients throughout the several states that Sdn is in. So we're thankful for you. We are online as well this morning, so we are live streaming on our YouTube and our Facebook page. And so to those of you that are with us virtually, just know we're thrilled to have you as well. You could ask questions. We're going to do a Q&A format at the end, and so we'll entertain your questions as well as those from the audience. So I want to introduce you to a couple of things. So we encourage you to get up and grab some coffee and water as you go throughout the day, and then, throughout the morning. And I'm really not going to keep you all day. So, but you know, the reality is it seems like every day we hear of a breach or a company that's been held ransom. We have seen it happen time and time again, really in municipalities. If you've watched 60 Minutes over the last couple years, they've done stories about that as it relates to municipalities and healthcare. And it can happen in the small shop, one person, to hundreds of thousands of employees. So we have great panels today, and we're going to really kind of focus on those two things. We're going to have first, Karina Keys is the president and owner of Key Media Solutions. She's going to talk about a personal experience that she had in her business. Then we're next from Sanford Health. We're pleased to have Brad Reimer with us, and he's going to talk about what happened in a breach or attack with Sanford. Then Katie Shuck is with the South Dakota Fusion Center. She's going to tell you really kind of the anatomy of a ransom attack, what it looks like, what happens, how do they happen, what is the answer. And then we're going to wrap up with Theron McChesney from Sdn Communications, and he's going to tell you about some products that are out there that obviously Sdn offers these, but a wide variety of things that you can do to help protect your organization. So I would like to welcome Karina, and have a great morning.
Thank you. See if I can do this here. As she said, I'm Karina, with founder and owner of Key Media Solutions, and to be able to really tell my story, which by the way is very fresh, and you're the first ones like hearing everything from start to finish, because it just happened this year, I do need to give you a little bit of a background about what we do. And so Key Media Solutions is a marketing technology firm. We work with businesses and full service agencies to integrate the latest technology into their marketing and advertising efforts to be more effective and more impactful in what they're doing and really be smarter about using the data that they have. And we live and die by the internet. Like if we do not have an internet connection, our company is down and we cannot work. And so we are on a cloud service, access to the internet, doing things all day long, every day. And I should not be a panelist because of this. I have gone through all of the training. I have had local training, I have had federal training on cybersecurity, on what we need to do to protect our company and protect our employees and our clients. I've worked with Sdn Communications to test our system and find any gaps that we have and help us patch those loopholes. My IT person on staff has got a master's degree in cybersecurity. We've done these things. I've had identity theft protection that I've been paying for several years. I have credit monitoring through 2 different credit monitoring services. I should not be a victim of identity theft. And if it can happen to me, I know that it can happen to you, and it can happen to anybody, because that's exactly what happened to me this year. So I was actually wrapping up a vacation out of state when I get a call from my COO who said, hey, we got this letter from the SBA. And I know we talked about it, but we weren't going to apply for an EIDL loan. And I said, yep, we agreed. We were not going to apply for an EIDL loan. Well, we just got a letter stating that we have to make payments. She tried calling the SBA, the phone number on there, and could not get anybody to speak with her. So she faxed the letter and emailed it to me, or scanned it, emailed it down to me. And I called the phone number, at this point completely thinking that this is an error. Somebody just screwed up. We're going to call them. They're going to redirect this to wherever it needs to go, and it's going to be done. 15-minute phone call, and this thing's going to be behind us. That is not what happened. What they told me is they confirmed that a loan had been made under my name, my business name, our EIN number, social security number, and the funds, $150,000, had been deposited into a bank account in November of 2020. Now, this is January 27th of 2021, and this is the first that we knew anything about this. Again, I have 2 credit monitoring systems in place, and I did not get a notification of any sort of credit check that happened on my name or my social security number. So this really started a whole firestorm of activity that needed to happen. And I think the timeline. So the first thing I did was called the local SBA office and asked them what I needed to do. And the local SBA office had no information available. They recommended I call the Freedom of Information Act. So I called Freedom of Information Act. It was harder to get a copy of the loan application than it was to file the loan application, for the record. I had to submit 4 forms of documentation to prove my identity. I had to have signed affidavits. I had to have notarized documents. I had to mail them down to an office in Texas and wait for them to be able to process it, for them to even send me the loan application so that I could look at what was even submitted under my name and my social security information. And so I knew at that point they had my company EIN, they had my personal social security number, they had my home address and my business address. They had financials that were not accurate, but there was financial information on there. The contact information for the phone number and the email address were not our information, but it was close enough that it would have passed a quick view inspection. So I think the phone number was off by 2 digits, and the email address had just a different .com.url type deal. So all this information was now out there in the public, and or at least available. So I know that my social security number has been used, hacked, stolen somewhere along the way. Our company EIN number, which isn't as difficult to get, but isn't, posted in public places and definitely not on our website. But this information was all on there. So within a matter of about 2 days, we had to file a fraud claim with the SBA, the fraud department. I had to file a claim with the Office of the Inspector General. I had to file a claim, the Freedom of Information. Liberty ID was my credit personal identity theft insurance provider. So I worked with them to expedite some of the activities that needed to be done. The credit bureaus, by the way, there's 4 of them, not 3. If you don't know, look into that. There's a new one that's just kind of starting up. So I had to not only file a fraud report with the credit bureaus, but I had to contact each individual credit bureau and have my credit frozen. We had to file a local police report. I had to file with the IRS, the Social Security Administration, the Postal Service, the National Telecom and Utilities Commission, because apparently when somebody has your Social Security, they sign up for a bunch of utilities and then don't pay them. IdentityTheft.gov. But additionally, we also took the steps. I notified all of our employees as to what was going on, and we also reached out to our clients and let our clients know what was going on. Just because if anything were to disrupt our business, we wanted them to be aware of what was happening and the fact that we were on it and that we were taking steps to protect their information. So even though our company information and my personal information had been stolen, we wanted to ensure our customers that their information was still secure and safe. Also in this time, I am part of a couple of different networking groups with other business owners. And so I reached out to these other owners, both locally and nationally, to let them know what I was learning throughout this process. And to say, hey, this is what's happened to me. Make sure you go and pull a credit report, check what's happening. Because I had been told by a couple of different organizations that it was an internal job. It was somebody on my staff, it was somebody in my family that stole my identity and applied for this loan, because they're the only ones that would have access to that information. And I didn't believe it. I'm like, no, nobody would do that. So as I was talking to these other business owners and they started checking and pulling credit reports, almost a third of them replied with some sort of breach. Either there had been a credit report pulled from the SBA that they were unaware of, that there had been an application filed and denied, that there had been an application that was still in process, or that there was an application that had been funded. And that is a lot. And what that did is it confirmed for me that this was not an internal job. This was much larger than that. And because of that then, and after talking to a couple of these local business owners, I decided to come forward and I reached out to Sioux Falls Business and to Kellerland and just said, hey, this is something that people need to know about. This is something that needs to be shared, that business owners need to be aware of and they need to be able to check. Because what happened is when all of this federal funding came out, all of these fraudsters found an easy access to a whole lot of money, and there was very little double check in place early on in this process. And it was super easy to fill out a form, virtually confirm your identity, and get funded in a matter of days or weeks. And that is what's happening. And so because of the local stories, I actually was contacted by CNBC and also did a story with them and tried to just create as much awareness about this as possible. Obviously, ongoing credit monitoring, I still do that. It's going to happen for a very long time. But this whole time, there's been no communication from the police department, the SBA, the Office of the Inspector General. I've had no contact, no information. I've reached out, I've asked questions, I've emailed, and there's been zero communication, not an email, not a letter, not a phone call. So finally, getting towards the end of September, still not having any sort of resolution, knowing that this loan was coming due in November, I kind of started to pester the fraud department, to be honest with you, and I finally got a hold of somebody. And they said, well, you didn't sign an affidavit of a fraud. I'm like, am I supposed to sign an affidavit for fraud? Because I filled out a whole lot of paperwork. So anyway, because this all happened so quickly, they implemented processes in February to kind of handle all the claims and the volume of claims that were coming forward. And because I filed my claim in January 27th, it was kind of stuck in a loophole. It wasn't being processed because the forms that they started to implement as of February 1st were not ever sent to me or given to me or provided. So I got the forms, I filled them out, I submitted them back. And interestingly enough, the SBA fraud department wanted me to fill out these forms and email them back to them with my social security number, with my EIN, with my address. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. Didn't we learn anything this year? This is not going to happen. So it took several days of going back and forth with them to be able to submit the information in a way that was protected and safe. And I think the biggest takeaway is even the fraud team does not have this all figured out. And a lot of people are going to ask you to email confidential and secure information like your social security, credit cards. Don't do it ever. I know my social security was compromised somewhere. I know that my information has been part of breaches that have happened in the past through Target or Experian or any one of those things. My guess is my social security number's probably been out there for a really long time. And I also know from some of my training that as a business owner, as an executive, as a C-level, especially if you're in finance, your information is 10 times more valuable to these fraudsters than the average person on the street. And once that is out there, it is sold for a lot of money, and it's held on the black market. And my suspicion is they've had my Social Security for a while, or it's been out there for a while. And when the idle loan information became available, it was probably just a matter of how much they were willing to pay to get that information. And so, you know, my takeaway and lessons learned is that really just continue, make sure you do have the protection in place and the processes in place so that when this happens, you can recover very quickly. And we did have that. We were prepared. This is just a copy of the form, the application that was out there. And we were able to continue to move forward and protect the business and protect my own credit because we had the processes in place and we had the people and the tools ready to go so that when this did happen, we were able to just move into it. And it did, I probably spent about 80 hours on the phone doing paperwork, filing, claiming, follow-up, but it could have been significantly worse. And we did find out then at the end of September that the claim is disassociated. We do not have to pay the loan back. But it was still 9 months of a lot of stress that was not needed, a lot of unknowns, and a lot of activity that could have hopefully been prevented in some way. Let's see, I think I've got just one more. Yeah, this is the yay letter. So that's been my experience, and again, I feel like I think I did everything and had everything set up, and it still happened. And I know it can happen to just about anybody. And as much as we try to prepare and as much as we try to do the things, everything right, there's still a lot of risk out there. And these individuals are getting a lot of money for playing on computers and figuring out all those loopholes and figuring out how they can use our information in a way to benefit them. I will never know if the people who did this will be caught. I will never know if they'll be prosecuted. I do know what bank account it went into, and I would think they would be able to track the money from there, but I will never find out what's going to happen in that aspect of it. So key takeaways is freeze your credit. Call the credit bureaus and freeze your credit so nobody can access your Social Security number, get credit on your behalf without your knowledge of it beforehand. Have a credit monitoring system in place and identity theft protection in place. And I have Liberty ID, but I know that there is 3 or 4 really good companies out there that also provide the same service. And I've sent a lot of people their way in the last year because everybody I talked to, I'm like, get identity theft insurance. But protect yourself and protect your employees. We've actually, because of this, have offered it as a benefit to all of our employees. So we pay for identity theft protection for all of our team as just an added benefit. So I think that is it. And I know I'll be on the panel, so we'll be able to answer questions. But up next is Brad Raymer with Stanford.
All right, well, he's switching this over. I assume by the look in the room, you guys are okay with me taking my mask off while I do this. All right. Yeah, so welcome. I appreciate you guys having me today. I'm Brad Reimer from Sanford Health. I'm part of the technology leadership team at Sanford. I've been with Sanford a little over 4 years. I oversee back-end infrastructure, a lot of the IT operations, and luckily, cybersecurity, if you want to say luckily. But prior to that, I spent 6 years with DocuTap as their CIO, and prior to that was with Wells Fargo for 16 years in a variety of different technology roles. So a little over 25 years in IT in general. It's just kind of crazy how much information security, even though it's been part of my role, has just really ramped up over the last couple of years. I mean, it is just a night and day difference. Even though it's always been important, we've always talked about information security, information, identity theft and those types of things. But what's happening with ransomware, especially with our industry, but it really is starting to apply much broader than just healthcare specifically, even though that's what I'm focused on. We'll talk a little bit about that today. I think there's stuff that applies no matter what size business you have, what kind of organization you are. It's just a completely different game than it was a couple years ago. So I want to do just a quick poll. How many in the room, just raise your hand, how many in your room outsource your IT or some portion of your IT to some type of a local provider or national provider? If you about half, so that tells me that, okay, of those that didn't raise their hand, how many of you don't have any IT staff or affiliation with a partner? Okay, that's good. That's good. All right. So some of you may know, is coming about 60 days now, Sanford was attacked by somebody trying to inflict ransomware on us. We were super lucky at the outcome of this to be able to call this an incident and not a breach. But the activities and everything that went around it is very applicable, no matter kind of what type of a scenario we're in with, be it ransomware or be some other type of security attack. So I'll run through a little bit of what our learnings are and what that timeline looked like, but you're gonna notice some common trends in this, is that it's a lot of the things where our success factors didn't have really anything to do with technology. It had to do with preparedness, had to do with some leadership discussions and a number of other things that really made a difference in the outcome that we had. So we did, during this situation, our team stepped up more than you would ever think. Egos were laid at the door, titles were laid at the door, people worked across silos much more than they typically would. We had great partners that came to the table. We called the Fusion Center. We just had everybody. It was an all hands on deck, and it wasn't anything that we could have done completely on our own. So part of the reason I asked if you have an IT partner is because I would hope one of the takeaways that you have at the end of the day is that you're reaching out to them and starting to talk to them about what does this mean? What are the things that I could do to prepare? Because it does take a village to kind of manage this stuff. And if you try to go it alone, you're higher likely find yourself in a situation that is a little bit more difficult to get out of. But same as Karina said, we had the technology, we had the people, we had the tools, we had the training, we had great partners, and it still happens. I hate that saying that everybody, it's not if but when. It just makes you almost feel like you're not being proactive enough, but there's some truth to it. It's gonna be something that happens to either yourself or somebody you know or your organization, and it is worth spending the time up front to make sure that you've kind of thought through things and you're prepared. This is a slide, and I'm not gonna run through all the details, but this is a slide that we showed our board of trustees within the last month. So within healthcare, obviously, there's been a lot of press around some breaches and those types of things. So the board themselves is asking for some additional information and help us really understand what's going on. I don't know what your board meetings are like, but they gave me an hour to speak about cybersecurity to the board, which usually has 10 to 15 minute topic conversations. So I wasn't quite sure what I was getting into, but it was really encouraging to see that they were engaged in a way that they're just wanting to learn. And that's one of the things you'll see as I kind of pepper throughout this, engagement with whatever you consider your leadership team, whether it's yourself, whether it's a board, whether it's a group of peers that are around you. These discussions need to happen, and the more you can get in front of them, the much better situation it definitely puts you in. But there's a couple things here, even though this is more specifically around healthcare, I do think a lot of this is very applicable regardless of the size of organization or what industry you're in. Ransomware, it was just kind of quickly mentioned, I think you'll see this, it's a different game. So if you roll back the clock a couple years ago, ransomware was kind of a nuisance. It may hit some portion of your PCs or something like that, or at home, and it freezes you up a little bit, and you can get out of it pretty easy, or you're paying somewhere, something in the thousands of dollars range to get out of it. It's much different now. These organizations that are doing this, and whether it's a person that you know, and I want to contradict a little bit of what you mentioned, it's not people playing with computers. These are sophisticated, organized groups, gangs. Sometimes enterprises, they have their own tech staff, they only have their own help desk, they have their own call center. nation state stuff. These are big time players. They're well funded and they're recruiting top talent across the world. So this isn't the pimply faced 17-year-old in mom's basement just messing around after they're playing video games. These are people that are they've got a business model around this. It's actually an industry now worldwide that is being tracked. So you've got to take them seriously, regardless of the size of the organization. What also has switched is it used to be a game around just trying to get somebody some inconvenience on their PC, or maybe it was about a data breach. We now have situations in Sanford to where this is a patient safety issue. Some of our major systems go down. That's a huge impact on what's going on. I've unfortunately had to use our health system a lot this last year. Family surgeries, mother-in-law through hospice, through a number of things. And when this was going on, it was just kind of crazy to think through what would have happened in the middle of that surgery if those systems would have went down. From a medical side, there's protections around the stuff that are really, really, really critical. But just the chaos it can bring if all of a sudden all of the information, all the systems aren't working together in concert with each other. And just within the last month, I don't know if you saw it in the news, but they've correlated directly the first patient death based on a ransomware attack, and it was an infant. So it's not just a game of, do I have a data breach? Do I have to pay a little bit of a ransom? Which those are serious things. But now for our industry, it's a major patient safety issue. They're now attacking supply chain. They're now attacking public infrastructure. I mean, those things are much bigger in terms of the scope of what ransomware is doing. So we've got to take it extremely seriously. So one of the things that we did prior to, now this was probably 6 months or so prior to us having any indication that we were going to have an event, because of some of the stuff that was coming to the news with healthcare system breaches, there were healthcare systems that were completely shut offline for 30 to 45 days. They were diverting all of their patients. They were having to evacuate their ICUs. They were having to stop cancer treatments and put them over to different health systems that are hours away. So we started paying a little bit more attention to the what ifs. And this is one of the takeaways I hope you would go through is, what if you would get a ransomware attack and your systems are down and you can't access them? Would you pay a ransom? Some organizations will, some won't. Government now is trying to step in and say whether you can or can't. But I would go through that exercise with, again, whatever you kind of consider your leadership trust circle. Would you pay a ransom or not? And if so, how much? How much could you afford? Do another real quick poll. How many of you have some type of a cybersecurity insurance policy? Okay, quite a few. That's good. But that industry is changing as well. I'll be really interested to see what happens with your premiums over the next year. That's something you should be paying attention to and talking to them about it if you've got a renewal coming up here in the next year or so. But they now have, your cybersecurity insurer now has a different level of interest in what might happen during a ransomware attack, because they know that they're possibly on the hook to pay. And what you really got to think through, and I encourage you to look through the details of your policy. What role do they have if you notify them that you have some type of a security incident? Their interests are not going to be aligned with what your interests are. This is going to be a money game for them. This is going to be a business thing for you, and whether you have enough to be able to keep, a viable business going. So think through some of those things, and again, talk about that with your leadership team. One of the things that when we were going through this, again, luckily did not have to enact it, but we were coming upon a payroll. It's like, okay, what happens if we can't get payroll done? I mean, then all of a sudden you're impacting a lot more than just the business. You're impacting the employees, employee families, all of those types of things. So it's much broader than just what your core system would be. So our core system obviously is going to be the medical record system. So we had all kinds of protection around that. And we have protection around our other systems as well, but we knew that there were certain ones that were probably a little bit more vulnerable than others. Think through that, plan through that, and one of the biggest things that I can encourage you to do is almost system by system, think about and document, even put some notes about it. What would happen if that system's no longer available? How long could you go without it? When do you need to, my daughter's calling me, sorry. That's kind of concerning because she should be in school. Sorry, lost my train of thought there. But yeah, look through those systems and just think about what happens if they're not available. How long could you go without them? And what's your backup procedure? What's your manual procedure for dealing with that system being down? Could you do payroll manually? Could you pay a supplier to replenish supplies in a different way than you typically do? So think through some of those, and that's the engagement that we had with the rest of our organization. We probably spent 75% of our time in the 6 months prior just talking through that. What would you do if this system went down? What would you do if that system went down? What do you have for manual backups? What was really interesting, and this was a lesson learned from some of the other health systems that went through this, fortunately before we did, is they had downtime procedures that were really good for 24 hours, 48 hours, maybe up to a week, but things really started to break down when you started thinking about 2 weeks, 30 days. It's just a much different scenario. So I would encourage you to, again, to have those conversations with your team. Okay, another quick poll. How many of you have some type of a relationship with an outside IT third party for incident response? So if something started to happen, you've got them on retainer. Okay, that not as many, and I would have kind of expected that. That's something to maybe look into. It's not for everybody, but there definitely is an increasing need for having an incident retainer with a firm that is experienced in doing that. This is their day job. This is what they do every day of the year. We had our incident retainer engaged within hours of suspecting that we had something going on, even before we had an understanding of what the full breadth of the potential of this attack was. And that expertise to be able to lean on, and just even having somebody within your IT partner that can help be an outside voice and a perspective, because you're going to be freaking out. They can be a voice of reason, and they've got a very methodical process. Some of those can get pretty expensive, I understand that, but there are situations that have been situations here in the last year to where there are so many attacks going on that you call some of these folks that can help you, that are cybersecurity experts in helping with attacks. They're full. They don't have anybody else to send you. If you've got a retainer in place, that can save you a lot of heartache during that time. Again, it's something to talk through. It's not just for everybody, but you definitely want to have that conversation with your cybersecurity insurance vendor and just with your other security partners. This is just a timeline. I'm not gonna ask that you look at the details of that. But again, I would focus on the left-hand side of this timeline, which is, this is the stuff that you can do now. This is the stuff that you can do ahead of time. Because once you get past this little dotted line, which is when our security event happened, all bets are off. The stress, the anxiety, you're in hand-to-hand combat with criminals that are pretty strong. The stuff that you can do to educate your organization is going to make a huge difference. And where it made a difference for us was in these first couple days here, when we were just trying to figure out how are we going to respond, what do we need to be doing. Because we had talked with our executive teams and our boards and others about the what if scenarios, they were already kind of primed to be able to make decisions. Within an hour of us recognizing that we may have something bigger going on, we had our top executives up to the CEO engaged in helping making decisions. At that point, it's not an IT game. What you have is a potential impact to the organization. It's an organizational, operational game. We had leaders across all of our footprint engaged in helping make decisions. That was super critical. In ransomware, hours are golden. It can spread so fast. We were lucky enough to get what I would consider two of the nation's top cybersecurity response firms in to help us. They said that we were probably within 24 hours of of being completely disabled. So if we would have delayed, there's stories, if you go out and read them, you can just Google them and find them for these healthcare systems. They got in gridlock and decisioning for 2 or 3 days. During that period of time, took out all their systems. So quick decisions are super, super critical. And I would venture that you can only do that if you're doing the prep work and discussion ahead of time. That, honestly, I think was the make or break. And this is nothing technical. Didn't cost us a dime. Took a little bit of time, but it was just open discussion around the what if scenarios to when we got there, we had a little bit more foresight and planning into how we wanted to deal with that. Success factors, a lot of this I kind of talked through already. We did tech team education. We did executive education. Thinking about decisions, what are your risk-based decisions going to look like? Because there's going to be trade-offs. We were talking about, internet, you live and die by the internet. We were talking about what happens if we need to shut down the internet. And it's just, you start to have some trade-offs. Well, this system's not going to work. And you can just kind of talk through those things. Time boxing those decisions. So one of the other things that was very helpful for us, and this is maybe a little bit more akin to helpful in a larger organization, but when we had that C-suite's attention, we started planning through and documenting some more what-if decisions. So we didn't have to call them and get a decision every single time. It's like, if we see this happen, do we have the approval to do A, B, and C? If we see that happen, can we do X, Y, and Z? And we had those pre-thought because as soon as we started seeing things, we needed to be able to respond. And again, the timing and the urgency. And that's why I say, if you have somebody that's a third-party vendor for your IT, talk through this type of stuff with them. How are you going to make decisions back and forth? How are you going to be able to communicate what needs to happen? Because the timing and the urgency is just, is so, so important. I put up there the Readiness of Sanford incident command process. So this was something we couldn't have pre-thought through, but we have an emergency process that can be enacted if there's a disaster or tornado in a community, just a variety of different things that are going to pull all of the leaders together to make sure that we're all on the same page. We actually had this enacted because we were right at that kind of the ramp up of Delta variant and all those types of things from a COVID perspective. But the reason I put that up here for this group is that real-time communication amongst your leaders and decision makers is going to be really, really, really critical. Because you may have one person talking to the media, you may have another person talking to a vendor, you may have one person talking to your staff, and if you're not all in sync, how fast this moves along, it can get out of hand pretty quick. So find and, again, pre-think through, pre-plan through what your communication in any type of a disaster is going to be. Again, it's worth its gold. You spend an hour in a meeting, it's surprising how much your head knowledge goes up just by being able to talk through it. Team rotation strategy. So we had because of some of the prep work that we had done, we had anticipated that this could be a 10, 20, 30-day potential event. We started rotating staff really early. And even though when you look at our timeline was a little bit less than 2 weeks, we would, 3 days in, had people that hadn't slept yet. So you intentionally need to think about how are you going to save, and especially save yourself as a leader to be able to have a fresh mind, to be able to make fresh decisions. And who's your backup going to be? Do you have a trusted partner in one of your vendors that while you're sleeping, you're comfortable with them making the call, or at least just maybe waking you up for the most critical decisions? Being able to have a clear mind through this, because it's changing so fast, is really, really important. So I wanted to put that up there as well. So some things to think about. I kind of mentioned it. What's most important to your organization? Do you know which systems are most important for your organization? And you may not think about it your traditional systems. It could be email. It could be internet connection. Or it could be some major core system, depending on what your business is. Talked about, do you have those downtime procedures? It's worth documenting them. You should do this for business continuity planning and disaster planning, that type of stuff, but now these cyber events are playing right into that. Which systems should you isolate ASAP? This is another discussion you can have with your IT provider. Who can you trust in a security event? Can you trust your IT provider that was supposed to be doing the security for you? That's an interesting one. So do you have somebody else that you can reach out to that is going to be a voice or reason for you? So maybe this is an industry peer. Maybe it's a legal advisor. There's a variety of other things, but trust will come into your mind if all of a sudden your systems are down for your traditional IT folks. Who can make decisions? Talked about that a little bit. Do you need out-of-band communication? So one of the things that I think has kind of surprised people lately is when ransomware comes in and swipes across a bunch of your systems. Phone systems go down, your internet goes down, your email goes down, all of your traditional methods for communicating could be impacted. If your systems on your phone have two-factor authentication back into your main systems and all those types of technical things, what you think might be isolated to your phone all of a sudden doesn't work either. So think about, what are you going to do in a situation when you need to find some type of an out-of-band communication? Do you need to run to Walmart and buy a bunch of, pay-for-use phones? Things like that. Again, just if communication during an event is going to be really critical for your organization, that's something to spend a little bit of time thinking about. So that's what I wanted to run through. Hopefully these hopefully non-technical learnings can make a difference for your organization. I really think that they do apply. Obviously, depending on the scale of your organization, there's a level of sophistication and rigor that you might put around them in a different state. But best thing I can do is just start talking about it, because it does make a huge difference when you get into the situation or you feel like you're backed into a corner. It's not just a brand new, fresh conversation. I think next, Katie from the Fusion Center is going to come up and speak.
She is. We're going to take a quick break here, just a couple minutes. We're going to let you check in on your daughter and make sure that she's really at school. So the coffee's refreshed and the beverages are refreshed. So we're going to just take probably a 5-minute break and come on back. So thank you. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with the second half of our presentation. We're going to hear from Katie Shuck with the South Dakota Fusion Center. And Katie is working on her doctorate from Dakota State University in cyber science as well. So please welcome Katie.
Hi, and Jesse actually asked me to start off just really quickly with a little bit of my backstory. So I did not start off in cybersecurity or IT many moons ago. I actually started off in communication and advertising. And so when I hear Karina's story, I completely understand where she's coming from the marketing side of things and the tools and everything else. But about 15 years ago, I actually fell victim to, it wasn't identity theft exactly, but I got put on an ISIS kill list through social media use and some publications of work that I was doing within the military community. And I had news stories put out about the work that I was doing and with publications and everything else. And somebody thought it would be fun to put a group of military spouses and high leading military leadership onto this kill list that scared the living daylights out of me. So I actually shut down all my social media and everything for a little bit of time and really began to question the anatomy of what was happening with all of this. We came to later find out it wasn't ISIS, it was actually the Russian Caliphate, so a hacking group who just thought it would be fun to do this and cause chaos within the military community. But fast forward, I start going into really researching the anatomy of attacks, the anatomy of these threat actors, everything to truly understand, like, what is it that they're doing? How are they doing this? How on earth did my name as some little, like, I was barely in my 30s at the time, and my name, I hadn't really done what I thought was much of anything. I was not a large-scale, nationwide leader in any sort of movement or anything like that. How did they get my name on this? So really started looking into that, went back to, did several different things, worked with the military on Operation Security, and kind of went through, found DSU, went back, got my master's degree, and working on my PhD, which is now on open source intelligence, so looking at what's freely available out there. But I also do a lot of ransomware research, and that's actually what my dissertation topic is on, is how available the information is, and it helps really these threat actors, these criminal organizations, to develop these attacks on you. So we're going to really kind of start off and look at, like, so you've been ransomed. Here are a couple of things that you might see if you actually get a ransom. The first one on the right is actually a letter that might pop up. It might be a .txt file on your desktop or somewhere within there that's pretty easy to find. It says, hey, we're so sorry that we've done this to you. They're actually very polite. We're so sorry we've done this to you, but here's what you can do to get your money back. Go to this, you have to download Tor usually, get onto the dark web, they give you the site, and then you begin the negotiations. Otherwise, this Black Matter ransomware group, which is an up-and-coming group that's kind of reorganized from some other groups, they'll actually put it straight on your desktop. They'll give you a new desktop background. It's so nice of them to make it easy for you. But then, does the clicker work here too? Okay. So what they're saying on here, is kind of interesting. You get to their dark websites, and it's no longer they're just asking for money. That would be kind of a single extortion thing that they're doing. Now they're going into double and triple extortion campaigns. So they're not only asking for that ransom, which actually leading up to several years ago, it's been about 2 or 3 years ago, I can't remember with the COVID year, makes it fuzzy. But my husband and I actually had our home network ransomed. And our home network does look like a small business. We do a lot more than the normal people of just looking at email and stuff like that. But my husband had set up, because he travels a lot with his job, he had set up remote desktop on there. They got in through remote desktop protocols, some vulnerabilities in there, and actually ransomed us. So we did see that TXT file on ours. Thankfully, we had good backups and were able to restore it. And at the time, I really started looking at, like, wait a second, what is this ransomware? Because I knew a little bit about it, but I really was looking at malware at the time and trying to understand, okay, what happens when you get malware and how do these data breaches happen? As we get into ransomware, I've heard it said that ransomware is the wild, wild west. I really don't believe that to be true at all. These ransomware groups are highly intelligent, highly organized. I like to consider them more of like the 1920s mob mentality. They have the stronghold right now, and we're just trying to play catch up in many ways, is my belief. Now, what's happening with them is they are researching us like you've never seen before. Like Brad said, they have groups there, they have offices that are solely dedicated to researching. They have this Ragnar Locker group. If you look at this, they're starting to brand themselves. They're branding themselves as better than the recovery services, because the recovery services cost a fortune for you, and they'll only pay you or you only have to pay 1/10 of the cost to them to get your encryption keys or your data back. So they're better than them. They're starting to market and put out notes. If you look at the black one there, that's actually from Black Matter Group. My favorite 2 sentences on here is they're a team that unites people according to one common interest, money. So they're honest with you. And then even down there, they rely on honesty and transparency in our dealings with our victims. And I find that funny that they call that a victim and everything, but they're really starting to brand themselves and build that identity for their organizations. And even down here, the yellow one is actually grief ransomware, which they're saying, they've got other ransomware groups that are worse than them. So if you're going to get ransomed by somebody, you want to get ransomed by grief, according to their public site. Now, these are all from their dark web public shaming sites. So when you do get ransomed, as I mentioned, it's not just paying the ransom anymore. They're posting that you've been breached. They're posting, hey, we just fell victim to this person. And it's not just the hospital systems, the government, stuff like that. I go on every single day to these public shaming sites and see who's been ransomed. It's small organizations, local CPA firms, local law firms, news organizations. They're posting everything. Now, it's not always immediate, but eventually they'll get posted. If they're not posted, it's because they're selling them in dark marketplaces. So your data is getting out there. But they're also adding a third kick onto this, that if you don't pay the ransom, then they're notifying your customers or your employees as well. We've even had a recent report of a local school, not local to us, but a small school district here in the United States got ransomed, and they started contacting the parents because they exfiltrated the database of all of the students with the parent information and started emailing and contacting the parents to tell them that that school district got ransomed. So they're really upping what they're doing in these campaigns. So some of the recent regional attacks that we've seen here, obviously we've heard about the healthcare, and that was actually, I think, a great response team. I got called the morning of I have a great relationship with their cyber team. We do some stuff with the Fusion Center to help them identify any indicators that stuff might be coming their way. And so it was amazing to see the communication flow from that, and I can't say enough about the response team that they had. We're also seeing agriculture and food supply. So again, these ransomware groups know what they're doing. They're highly organized. So right now, we're seeing them hit agriculture. They've hit 2 local, within the region here, Iowa and Minnesota, they've hit the ag co-ops. It shut down their co-ops where they were having to do everything manually. Now, I didn't get a lot of the post information because both of the companies that got ransomed had cyber insurance. And I'd like to say great things about cyber insurance, but oftentimes they work against what I'm trying to do in getting the tactics and the indicators of how this happened. We can't get the information because the second you get the cyber insurance involved, you have to go to a non-disclosure agreement. So that cuts off all information flow to us. And we are, if you don't know who the Fusion Center is, we are an intelligence agency, a part of the Department of Public Safety here in South Dakota. So we do work with law enforcement. We work with anywhere from local, state, tribal, federal law enforcement. And my role is specifically with the cyber intelligence. We've seen attacks on the financial sector, banks, healthcare, obviously, government. We've had incidents here in the state where different government entities have been ransomed. And I'm also, again, seeing small businesses. These ransomware operators know when to attack. So right now they know that harvest is taking place. They're attacking the food supply. I fully anticipate that come here at the end of this month, they're going to switch over to the small businesses and the clothing stores, the shopping, anything with that they're going to start targeting them. Just because they know what time of year people need their services or their services are most used at the highest level, and that's where they're going to get the money because they know that your downtime costs you money. And so they say, well, we'll only charge you a tenth. I wish it was really that simple. But what we're going to see then is how it starts. A lot of times we do see the phishing campaigns. And in the last year, phishing campaigns have gone up 600% with malicious activity. And there are many ways that this is starting. We've seen a lot of, just actually yesterday, I got some information from the Department of Homeland Security where they're using some different malware that's coming through phishing campaigns and stuff. Now, this group is specifically targeting healthcare. They're targeting some of the larger critical infrastructure. I haven't seen this group target small businesses yet, but it's only a matter of time before they pivot their stuff. As I mentioned too, with my own personal experience, remote desktop protocols. If you are remoting in, that's a vulnerability. If any of your employees are remoting in, again, another vulnerability. You're not managing that endpoint of where they're logging in from. And so that increases your chances for an attack through your remote desktop protocols and software vulnerabilities. So we've kind of developed within the Fusion Center 5 steps that we recommend to securing yourself, starting with using strong passwords. I use this because it is publicly available information. You can go out and actually find news articles on this. But the recent ag co-op group in Iowa fell victim to ransomware through poor password management. Their password was chicken one. I don't know, as an agriculture group, that would be a really strong password. So, having that password, and I like to say move to a pass sentence now. It's no longer even just a passphrase of 2 or 3 words. Have a long sentence, everything as you're going through that. But make sure you have strong passwords. If you aren't already checking to see if that password is a part of a data breach, there are great sites out there and tools that you can use, like Have I Been Pwned, stuff like that. Use multi-factor authentication. So even if they get your password, you've got a secondary way that they have to stop there. So if you're using something, I'm sure Theron will have some tools and stuff there, but Duo, the text to password, or text to PIN, where you get a PIN texted to you and you have to verify that, yes, that actually is me, are great tools. As Brad mentioned, segment and segregate your networks. Make sure you've identified where your security or your topmost information is, that sensitive data, and make sure it's not on some other network where that could be easily accessed is also very important. Keeping your operating systems and software patched, making sure they're updated. So don't just say, oh, I don't have time to update this right now. I know I'm the first one to do that sometimes. I'm like, oh, I'm busy. And it pops up that, oh, Windows is going to need to patch. It's Tuesday. And I'm just like, oh, not again. But it's important to update all of the software and the operating systems that you have. And then maintain current, and I can't stress this enough, offline backups of your data. Offline is really important because these ransomware groups and other groups are getting in and actually cutting off the ties to your cloud storage. They're changing passwords. They're making it so you can no longer access it, and it can actually take you longer to prove that you are the legitimate person to have access to that, the owner of those cloud storage, than if you had those stored offline. So if you do fall victim to ransomware, as Brad mentioned, be prepared. Don't wait until the incident to start thinking about what you're going to do. We actually just, last week, I was a part of an incident response team here in the state, and the call that I got was, we've already contacted the FBI, we've contacted our cyber insurance, we're just waiting for them to tell us what to do. 24 hours later, they still hadn't heard from them. And they were very, very frustrated. So make sure you have a plan. Don't just wait for somebody to tell you what to do. Make sure you have a plan of what can you do before your cyber insurance response. Because if you read your cyber insurance policies, they'll oftentimes have a note in there saying what their response time will be. Many times it's 24 hours. So 24 hours can make a big difference of encrypting your entire networks if you don't have a plan of what to do. We just actually this month saw a ransomware operator encrypt an entire system in 3 hours. So making sure that you can get that information secured as quickly as possible, that you have a plan, is really important. Also know who to contact, because not all cyber attacks meet the threshold for the FBI. Now, I can't say enough about the great capabilities of the FBI cyber team, but that cyber team here regionally is out of Minneapolis. They're not going to be able to get down most of the time the same day. Oftentimes they'll be 24 or 48 hours later, and oftentimes they won't come at all because they only respond to certain thresholds of cyber attacks. So you do want to report to the FBI, but you want to know that they're not always going to respond to your ransomware attack. And we have had critical infrastructure ransomware attacks that they have not responded to because it hasn't met the threshold. So again, check your cyber insurance policies to see how long you have to respond. So know in your local area, like you said, have those retainers on hand for the third-party responders. Know at the Fusion Center, we do a lot of information sharing and stuff too. You can contact us. Local law enforcement, if you contact them, they'll automatically contact us. The Office of Emergency Management too will contact us. A lot of that information comes through, and we can help put you in contact with people there. But have that plan in place ahead of time. Know how your systems and data are connected so you can shut down the systems that haven't been encrypted yet. Again, making sure you don't lose critical information. And work with your legal counsel, and when possible, share the indicators of compromise so that other people don't get attacked. And this is where I, again, go back to some of the faults in cyber insurance, is that when you get that NDA, you have to do that. We stop getting information and we can't share that with other people. If you don't have an NDA, we try to share. We take out any information that would identify you as a victim, and we try to share that with other people. So when we get healthcare attacks, I've been able to share indicators without saying which healthcare system has been that. Same with, we have had other local entities that have been attacked, and I share that with other people within that same sector so that they can know, hey, this may be coming, because they're doing this in a very organized manner, and so if one gets attacked, another one is going to eventually. And then that, again, is where the Fusion Center can help in sharing that information. So I do have my contact information there, as well as our Fusion Center director, Paul Niedringhaus, his information. And that is what I have. So I am going to pass it on to Theron McChesney from Sdn to talk about tools.
Thank you, Katie. Good morning. Oh, wrong direction. There we go. I'm going to have the same problem I had the last time I gave this presentation. My very large thumb likes to turn off the monitor. My name is Theron McChesney. I'm a business intelligence analyst with Sdn Communications. That's just a nice title that says I get to play with data all day long and try to look for information that becomes actionable. I don't specifically focus on the cybersecurity realm. I work with a lot of accounting data. I work with network data and volumes, working with the traffic engineers. But back in 2014, when I started with the company, I was assigned to the DDoS protection platform project. And because of that, I started to aggregate data out of the DDoS platform. And that's where a lot of the stuff that you're going to see today originates. But first, I'm going to talk a little bit about Sdn Communications, the anatomy of a DDoS attack, if you're not familiar with it. And then we'll cover the regional cyber threat landscape, which is the information from our DDoS platform and our managed firewall platform at Sdn. And then kind of button it up with best practices, focusing on a lot of the same things that Katie just mentioned, but it's always good to hear them again because those best practices really don't change. First, a little bit about Sdn Communications. We are member-owned by the 17 independent telephone companies of South Dakota. Back in 1989, they joined their networks together to provide better long-distance rates to their customers, to their consumers and businesses in their local markets. So if you remember those dial-around codes for long distance and cheaper long-distance rates, that's what folks were trying to leverage back then. Over the years, the telephone companies really became broadband companies as the internet was expanding. And today, Our member companies in the colored areas on the map cover more than 80% of the geography of the state of South Dakota, and by the end of 2021, they will cover 93% of their home, farms, and ranches and businesses within their member territory with fiber to the premise. So they'll be completely fiber-based. Now, SDN is the business-to-business side of the member network, so we provide solutions in the white areas on the map, and then we also work with our member companies to provide services to businesses within their territories. What it's about the network. So together we have over 50,000 miles of fiber. And what do we do with that fiber? We service businesses that rely on reliability. We connect businesses with dedicated circuits, internet, wholesale backhaul. If you have a cell phone on the table in front of you or in your pocket, you're probably on SDN's network at some point during the day, regardless of the carrier that you're on. We aggregate our services for our members. That's a big part of our core mission. We aggregate their long distance. It's not today on tandem switches anymore. It's on soft switches and hosted PBX, so it's virtual and internet-based. We provide internet, digital TV aggregation for their digital head end, and business-to-business sales. In the cybersecurity realm, and the reason for being here today, we provide a distributed denial of service protection product, managed firewalls, and managed routers. There we go again. Who do we serve? A lot of the same businesses you've been hearing about today. Healthcare, emergency communications, banking and finance, insurance, the wireless carriers, education, government, manufacturing, and agriculture are the primary verticals that we operate in. So what do you hear? You've heard it all morning. Cyber threats in the news, big scary headlines, local stuff, healthcare, voice over IP company attacked in Canada, had a DDoS ransom attack for over a week, took off communications, one of the largest voice over IP communications firms in the world. The new cooperative incident that Katie mentioned, the Chicken One password, that just blows my mind. I saw it in the media, I saw it in the indicators, and it's really, it just keeps coming back up because some of those best practices are not being followed. They're big and scary headlines, but what do you see locally? Locally, our DDoS protection platform, as I mentioned earlier, started in 2015. As part of that project, the platform really wasn't very good at aggregating data across multiple customers. It was great at reporting individual responses. So if you were on there as a customer, you could see the incident, you could run a report, and you could get the information on that, and it was great at mitigating. But what it didn't do was take that information and say, okay, customer A, customer B, and customer C all saw this type of an attack. What does that look like? What kind of patterns are we seeing there? So we pulled the information from that using their API and aggregated it to a data warehouse so that we could go ahead and look across multiple customers. A short time after that, our managed firewall platform, which is very good, we started extracting data from that and reporting it in this cyber threat landscape. And now today we aggregate that data and produce it twice yearly to provide this regional snapshot. Now, what is a DDoS attack? Just very, very briefly, if you're not familiar, if you have a phone or any internet-connected device, your digital cameras that maybe protect your house, your Ring cameras, things like that, anything that has an internet connection can become compromised. If it becomes compromised, it's owned, or PHONED, in terms of being controlled by the threat actors. Those threat actors will then use those devices to make small requests of a service and to cause a big response in order to take that service offline and deny access to legitimate business traffic. It's all about filling the, overwhelming the endpoint with traffic from multiple sources. In terms of DDoS, there are basically three different types of attacks. You have your volumetric attacks, which I just mentioned, make a small request and get a big response. So DNS amplification, for instance, domain name server, your phone number's on the internet. It translates that common name to the IP address. Domain name servers have a flaw where if you make one request, it'll give back that information, but if you can construct it properly, it actually will provide the entire record, and if you do that enough over multiple times, you'll get a very large response, a very simple, hello, and it will talk to you for 10 minutes and continue to inundate your system. You have your protocol attacks, which are IP, TCP/IP, the protocols for communication on the computer. Those types of attacks are designed to overwhelm the endpoints. So your firewalls in that graphic that we had up on the screen earlier, the internet pipe where the zombies are all sitting out on the internet at devices are going to attack a single endpoint, and the protocol attacks are aimed at overwhelming that specific endpoint. Whereas the application layer attacks are focused on what's inside that endpoint. The applications running on the servers, the applications running on the computers on the other side. So what did our platform see? This is a graph of year-over-year information starting back in 2017. I've cut off the 2015 just to save some space. So it shows 2017, 2018 through 2021, first half of the year, the first 6 months. A nice increase in the number of attacks. So we're at last year, or this year, 2021, January to June, we saw 6,035 DDoS attacks monitored on our system. It's worth noting that while the system monitors a lot more alerts than that, we do our best to filter out anything that we think is a false positive. We go back into the information, and in the report side of it, I will identify something that says maybe it has just a single vector of attack, meaning that it's only because of the large amount of traffic, for instance, total traffic. I'll filter that out and throw it out of the report so that we're only looking at what we believe to be true and legitimate DDoS attacks. So during the same period, or 6-month period in 2021, we also saw a 39% decrease in the average attack duration and an 8% decrease in average attack size. What does that really mean? I mean, percentages of change in increase or decrease. Well, the average DDoS attack is right around 1.2 gigs per second. Your internet connection at your home, at my house, I subscribe to a 1 gigabit service. That size of an attack would take me offline if it was a sustained attack. When I had a small business that I ran several years ago, I only had 250 megs on my internet service. And that internet connection was my lifeblood. Much like Karina, like everything I did was on the internet. It was cloud-based services, it was databases. So if I had any kind of DDoS activity during the day, it would have taken me offline and I would not have been able to do my work at all. This particular graph shows the attack frequency rolling trend. So our system is seeing 34 attacks per day on average. Stark increase and increasing trend from 2016. You'll notice that in 2020, at the start of the pandemic, and this is something that's not just verified across our platform, but if you look at any of the other major providers for DDoS protection, they also indicated that there was a large number of DDoS attack increases during the pandemic. And then it's come down a little bit, actually. Starting in January, it has come down to 34. So it peaked at the end of last year at about 50 attacks per day, and it's now down to 34 attacks per day for the rolling frequency. So your business, if you think about that, that means that we're either seeing 34 different businesses seeing attacks or DDoS attacks per day, or maybe it's one business that's getting 34 attacks per day. But are you one of those 34, or are you that business that's having the DDoS attack all day long? What do we see in terms of duration? Well, 98% of them are under 30 minutes. Okay, 30 minutes of downtime? Well, that doesn't tell the whole story. Often what you see with threat actors in the DDoS realm is that they'll start an attack and stop an attack, start an attack and stop an attack. So the 98% that are under 30 minutes might be 10 minutes, stopped, and then you're interrupted again a half an hour later. They're just going to toy with you all day long. And so your total duration of being impacted is a lot longer than that, but the average is well under that. So if you're going to see a DDoS attack on your business, you're most likely to see it under 30 minutes. You're most likely on average to be about 1.2 gigs of impact. And in another piece, 99% of the DDoS attacks are under 10 gigs. So the 98th percentile is that 10 gig range in there. So that's probably what you're going to see. In terms of the number of vectors that you're likely to see, and this is again all average, this is average attack size by number of vectors of DDoS. So you have, on the bottom, you have the number of vectors. A vector is a method of attack. So I mentioned total traffic earlier. I mentioned DNS amplification, TCP, malformed packets, SYN, ping of death. All those are different ways of creating a DDoS attack. So across the bottom, you have the number of vectors. And on the left, you have the size. So what it's indicating is that if you have a 9-vector attack, your average in terms of length is 13 minutes, and your average size is 9 gigs. So it's not really a causation, it's more of a correlation, but it makes sense. If you have more, if the threat actor is coming at you with more vectors, you're probably going to experience a larger attack, not necessarily a longer one. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the managed firewall. SDN's managed firewall, powered by Fortinet, is a service that we have for our customers, and one of the key metrics that we look at is how much traffic was flagged as unwanted or suspicious. The reason that we look at that in this type of report is because we have a zero trust policy, essentially. We have the customer tell us what should pass. So when we're configuring the firewalls, we say nothing should pass until the customer says, yeah, that kind of traffic should pass. So we work with that. So we want to know why or how much was filtered as flagged as unwanted or suspicious and filtered out. It may not actually be bad. The customer just said they don't want that kind of traffic. Now, this is a decrease from 32% in the same period in 2020. Now, we attribute that largely to the shift of remote working, and here's why. So if you look at 2020, that 39% on the board, that's when everybody went home. And from there, the amount of traffic that was blocked and unwanted and filtered out had a nice decline. Why is that? Well, it actually makes a lot of sense. During the same period, we saw a 40% increase in the number of endpoints being monitored, while we also saw a 30% increase in the amount of traffic traversing those endpoints. So we changed the denominator of the equation. So the key metric that we were using of, hey, we're blocking a lot of traffic and this is cool and this is really good, became a little less meaningful because when you're working remotely, you're sending more traffic back and forth between the two endpoints and you're doubling the denominator. What type of unwanted traffic? Each period we look at the top 10 of types of attack that the firewalls are monitoring, and then we categorize them into the impact category. In the number one position this time is SSL anonymous Ciphers negotiation. This isn't necessarily a compromise. This is a configuration, and it's a choice. Do you want your server to allow anonymous communication? If the answer is yes, if you want that device to do that, then okay, you'll pass that traffic, and that's okay. But the answer is no, because it's a security risk of a man-in-the-middle attack. Somebody could intercept that and go ahead and you can't authenticate that that's actually who the endpoint that you're supposed to be communicating with, then you'd filter that out and drop it. So it's a risk of information disclosure. The categories are what I think are the most important thing. The reason we group them like that is what type of risk is it? Well, in the prior months or the prior year, denial of service was in the top category. So it matched what we were seeing in the DDoS platform. The UDP flood, the ICM flood, and other DDoS, there's only 2 in this one, were the top risk category in 2020. And now it's flipped to back to the information disclosure. I also want to point out the actually number 9 position, Apache struts. That came up a couple years ago. This is something that should be patched now. And apparently it's not. Well, it isn't that it's not patched, it's that the threat actors have probably put that in a toolbox. So we continue to see this even 3 years after that vulnerability was first identified as something that is being used to try to compromise systems. It just gets back to the point of what Katie and others have talked about, that you have to keep your systems patched because these tools are now in the threat actor's toolbox to use on an ongoing basis. As I was mentioning before, the information disclosure risk and the denial of service as attacks have flip-flopped in 2021 compared to 2020, and pretty significantly. So as we're seeing trends, denial of service is continuing downward in 2021. So what are the takeaways? 2021 saw a continued shift to shorter, faster, and increased vector complexity in the DDoS attacks. It continues to be about hitting the pandemic lifelines, e-commerce, healthcare, education, the online platforms, and Katie talked about each of those examples. I think it's a safe bet to say ransomware is going to continue to get worse than before it ever gets better, if it ever gets better. And the 2021 firewall data so far is pretty much steady state, similar complexity, size, and duration, with DDoS system compromise and information disclosure remaining top threat categories, swapping positions. And let's now just quickly bring it back, and we're not going to spend a lot of time here, but these are the same attacks that Katie was talking about, the Colonial Pipeline, the JBS, the New Cooperative, Black Matter Gang. Why is it important to bring it back to those? Well, it's really about the threat actors and what they're doing and what it says for those best practices. I like that she mentions the double extortion and the triple extortion. One that wasn't covered earlier is the DDoS extortion. So the voice over IP attack in Canada, that provider was attacked, it was about a ransomware or a ransom attack with a DDoS twist. So they were saying, okay, you pay us a ransom, or we'll DDoS attack you. And apparently they didn't pay because this was ongoing with that provider for more than a week. So that's important to note that these things can work in concert with each other. You might have a DDoS attack that precipitates, with a ransom ask, that precipitates intrusion and exfiltration with a double extortion attempt going for your business and then the customer and so on and so forth down the chain as they've taken the information, threat of release in the double, and then extorting the actual end consumer in the end. A last tactic that has come up recently are employee accomplices. So now you not only have to worry about your employees doing the day-to-day business, but if you have a disgruntled employee, the ransomware gangs and the DDoS ransom gangs will contact those employees and say, if you go ahead and install this piece of ransomware or click on this link and we are successful in getting a ransom payment from your company, we'll split it with you. Wow. So now the soft skills become really, really important in working with your employees and making sure that that doesn't happen. So back to the best practices. You've heard it all morning, and I'm not going to really add anything new here, but you have to plan and train for those weakest links. It's the people. So you have to teach folks not to click on the link, to be wary of everything that they're seeing. To know that they might be reached out to by a ransomware gang to become an active accomplice in a ransom scheme. That's really some scary stuff. Same advice, backing data up regularly, keeping the offline backups, verifying the integrity. That two-factor authentication, you mentioned Duo, that's something that, that is very, very important. Those are all things that New Cooperative publicly has said that they didn't have. They had weak passwords, JBS Colonial, they didn't use the multi-factor authentication. They had old VPN systems that weren't using that. In terms of password managers, the one piece of advice I would say is that your Google Bing password storage probably isn't the best thing in the world to use. I need to fix that on my own personal computer at home, but you can use things like Thycotic or LastPass, which would store those passwords and keep them safe. Those past phrases, I should say, rather than passwords. I got to get in the habit of saying that. And then those soft skills, the human element. It comes back to making sure that you have that plan and that you're working with folks, that they are educating themselves on not clicking the link, and that you trust folks or can trust them. With that, you have my email if you have any questions, and I think we'll just shift to the panel. Vernon?
All right, we're in the home stretch. We're going to have the panel come up here, and I'll kick it off with some questions, but I want you all to be thinking of questions to ask as well. You guys can socially distance a little bit on those as well. This microphone for the panel. And while you guys are getting seated, I want to end the day with, the most important part for the business people, I think, is what can they take? I'm going to ask each of you at the end, one thing that they can take back to the office that they can do today. So I'm going to ask each of you to respond to that at the very end. But I want to start off, I was in Dallas last week for a cybersecurity summit for our industry, and there is still so much disagreement. There were arguments in the room about this, and I want to settle it once and for all here with this group. Who do you call first? Who is it? The attorney? Is it your consultant, like Brad had talked about? Is it your insurance company? Is it law enforcement? I'm going to start with you, Katie. Well, let's start with you, Brad. You've got the microphone. Go ahead. I think it's on.
So I think I already answered this in my discussion. It was our incident response vendor. They, like I said, they know this stuff back and forth. This is what they do for their day jobs. Our requirements from a regulatory perspective and from a cybersecurity insurance perspective give us a little bit of a window of time before we have to report to authorities that allow us to really make sure we've assessed what's happening. And that incident response vendor was very critical in helping us understand really what was going on and if we had something as serious as we thought we potentially did.
So before today, I had no answer to that question. I don't know. But now I'm going to get somebody on retainer, and that will be definitely, that's my action point from today too.
I'm going to punt a little bit. It depends. What does your incident response plan say? So I'm going to go ahead and answer your question first. What should you do in your takeaway is you should make sure that you have an incident response plan, that you're thinking about these things in advance. Now, it might be that you want to call your vendor first. Absolutely, if that's what your plan says. But what if if you don't have a vendor on retainer, maybe it is your IT team, and so you're going to talk to your IT team first. Maybe they will say, okay, now that we've isolated it, we think, oh gosh, it's this one computer, it's isolated. Okay, now how serious is it? Is it now time to call law enforcement? Is it now time to call the Fusion Center? But it all comes back to your plan. So plan the plan and execute the plan.
I'm going to totally agree with Theron here. It really depends on who you are as an organization, of who you contact, because like we've all said, not everybody has that third-party vendor there. Not everybody has an internal IT. And so having that thought out beforehand is really what's going to determine who you call first. So make sure you're talking about that before you get into an incident and have that first person that you know and that they know who they need to contact then too. So you have that communication flow going forwards.
All right, very good. We're going to go down that hole a little bit. Rob, I'm putting you on alert because Rob was asking me a question beforehand. We're all different sizes, and you touched on, Katie, I think of the FBI won't take everything. So where does someone start? So I'm going to have Rob describe his scenario, and you can respond to that.
Yes, on a personal email account, I recently received kind of a threatening email, and it was surprisingly well written. And they were basically said, if you don't deposit the equivalent of $1,400 in Bitcoin into this online wallet, we're going to release all this doctored information and false pictures and all that. Is that the kind of email that the Fusion Center is interested in, or any other law enforcement agency? I didn't do anything with it. I just ignored it. And what should I do with that kind of personal email?
We've sadly seen way too many of those emails come through our office here in the past month, let alone the past year. They've all come from local law enforcement, and that's where we do have several law enforcement within the state that will investigate that. Some of them have come through consumer protection as well, if it's dealing with a business, but we have investigated numerous of them, but it starts out with local law enforcement. You contact your jurisdiction. They then usually don't have the capacity to go through and do, or the capabilities of doing that full investigation, so it'll come through our office since we have a little bit more, or go to DCI if we need help with that too.
So they should right away do it.
I think so, because you do need to assess, is it actually a real threat, or is it something that we've already seen and identified as fraud?
So Katie, let's talk about capacity. And this isn't in a critical sense of law enforcement, but how strong or weak are we from a law enforcement perspective in resources for cyber?
I'd say we're growing. I think that at least here in South Dakota, I know this past year, I've been in my position for just over a year, and we had an amazing person in the position before. We're reaching out and building the network and the understanding within local law enforcement, state law enforcement, of what we can do with the different agencies. We're developing a lot of connections so that we're growing. I get a lot more requests for information from law enforcement now than I did a year ago because they understand that I can go through, and if you get a fraudulent email or something that's sketchy, I can go through and do the investigations on that to see, is it something we've seen somewhere else? I can also share that information with other states to see if it's seen in other states too, especially on any sort of threat language.
Any perspective on the caseload in the Fusion Center?
It ebbs and flows. We're a law enforcement support agency, intelligence-led, and so it really depends on the number of people that contact us. We don't have a lot of downtime, but I know I can usually get back to people within 48 hours, I would say, is about response time for many of our kind of simple investigations. We've had some lengthier ones come through that take a lot more time, but we can get back pretty quickly.
Very good. Other questions from the audience? Jesse. Right there.
Can you talk about, Karina, in your case, I just appreciate you so much coming out, because oftentimes people and businesses want to keep this on the down low and are embarrassed because they think it reveals something about what they did or didn't do. So can you maybe give us a little insight into why you went public? Because it really opened a lot of people's eyes, not just those of us in Sioux Falls.
Honestly, it was a really difficult decision, and it took a lot of encouragement from other people I knew, because there is a risk of not only looking as a technology company like we don't have control of our technology, but it is embarrassing, and there is a fear that I will lose clients or I will lose business, or that there could be some sort of lasting impact. But at the end of the day, for me, I was just hearing from so many other people that were finding things that they also didn't know existed. And I just felt like business owners really needed to know, and they needed to be aware, and they needed to do the work to go back and look and see if maybe there is something that's already happened to them, or to protect themselves moving forward. And for me, it was a personal decision that I felt more strongly about warning other people and getting the message out that it was happening at a very large volume than, I guess, the fear of losing business or losing any clients because of it.
There is an emotional element to it. You kind of
Absolutely.
feel violated.
Yeah.
At what point did you just have a breakdown at all about this? Did you?
How many or when? That first day that it really kind of suck in, there's just this pit, and it's just that fear of, oh my gosh, now what? And how big is this? And are there other things that have happened? And what does my credit score look like? And did they take out other loans? And how else has this been impacted to the business? And it's definitely a process that goes from this absolute fear and terror of what's happening to there's a lot of anger that it happened, and then just even a little bit of like mourning, and it's like, I can't believe this happened to me. And so I worked the whole gamut of those emotions, and some of them came very quickly and some of them lasted for several months.
Brad, you touched on the emotional toll, especially staff not sleeping, but were there elements of that fear and anger that you experienced as well?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, when I was the previous year, had experienced quite a bit of just healthcare in my life. And it was just more concern for if this got really bad, what would be happening to our patients. And so it was a different pull. This is now attacking the mission of what Sanford's here for. And it was a heavy weight trying to figure out how you keep ahead of the guy, the gang, the whatever. So it definitely did kind of pull on your heartstrings when you were thinking about how you were going to respond and what decisions you were making.
For both of you, do you feel like your companies are stronger as a result of coming through on the other side of it?
Clearly, yeah.
Yeah, and I would absolutely agree with that as well.
Just one comment on that. The threat actors are counting on that fear. They're using that as leverage. So the more you can do to plan ahead and remove that fear element, the more that you'll break down the psychology of the attack and be able to respond better.
That's good. Jake.
So Brad, you mentioned kind of, going into this situation of just, as you're run down, your employees are run down, and just, as you sleep and kind of recover and prepare to kind of be in that best mindset, having trust that someone's going to make the right decision. And, I think I think being a technical person, oftentimes as, we're using vendors or other, departments, we're always on this task of kind of, my stuff is good, right? Like, I'm good, move to the next group or the next vendor. So maybe from a culture perspective, like, how did you kind of get there on the front end of this of, having that trust kind of, foundation in Sanford's enterprise, and then maybe for Karina of just, how you've gotten there or how you plan to get there as, as you're kind of going in this situation, and, heck, it could have, you were on this path of maybe it could have been somebody you knew or somebody within the company, but maybe just how you kind of prepare for that from a trust perspective for the culture.
So I think I mentioned this real quickly, but part of our prep with our executives was we put that question out there. If we get a ransomware attack, are you going to trust us as your IT team? Because at the end of the day, we're the ones that should have been preventing this. And just having that discussion ahead of time built trust and put us in a position that they were going to trust us as we go through it for decisions and being able to pull them in. The other thing is it was fully transparent. We pulled the rest of the organization's leadership in hour one just to make sure that there was full visibility of what was going on. So communication went a long way in building that trust with the team and who was responding to it. Some of our vendor partners, we've had longstanding relationships with them. When they come to the table, there's a level of trust already, and when they bring their experienced people for that incident response, you could just tell that they know what to do and how to respond to that. So trust didn't end up being a real big issue. The other thing we pulled together, we had what we call essentially a big conference call with all of our team. And we did that early on just to explain what was going on, to talk through what they should be looking for. And we just made the comment that this is one of those times to where you're not concerned just about, if you're a database administrator, we now need you to be thinking about network and servers and just thinking outside of your realm. And we had more people step up with knowledge that we didn't even know that they had to be able to support the system as a whole. So that's where, coming out of this, we're in a much better spot because we've got a much broader, more experienced team than we probably gave credit to.
You touched on this earlier, Brad, but can you expand on that conversation with the board? SDN answers to a board to how do you force non-technical people, and it didn't sound like you had to force your board, but what should be the elements of that conversation?
Unfortunately, we saw a lot of the healthcare stuff in the news. So the attention level was already raised quite a bit. So like I said, we didn't have to fight our way to the table. But trying to figure out what were the right conversations to have that didn't become super technical, we spent a lot of time. We spent some time with some partners on that and talking to some of the other healthcare systems that had went through this. We took a view, okay, what were the operational impacts to the caregivers? What were the things that were going to be barriers for them? Because at the end of the day, that obviously is our mission. So once we started discussing it from that point, rather than from the technology standpoint, it was just more relatable and it was something that was more real to them when you can start talking about the things that may impact their job. So that pulled the organization in. The board kind of asked just for hey, we're seeing this in the news. What's the general update? Is Stanford safe? And so we went through the whole conversation as you're never completely safe. It's a risk game, and it just went through some education and approached it more from that standpoint.
And what does it mean from a budgetary impact on the organization? How does that change? And Karina, if you're willing to talk about that from a small business too.
And for me, it's a little bit different because it was a very personal attack on me. And as being the owner and not having a board, I didn't really have to seek advice or input from others within the organization. But I will say it's because of the transparency and communication within our organization that my operations person flagged the letter and didn't just start making payments, that she questioned it and said, hey, we talked about this and this doesn't seem right, and was able to bring it then to my attention. And throughout the entire experience, I was very open and shared all the information with our team and our employees in real time, and just tried to assure them that everything was being handled, that it was, we were, double checking all of our systems, we were going through our incident plan and following the process to make sure everything within the organization was secure and everything was safe, and then also communicated that to our clients to try to maintain that trust that we had established. And that really was a critical component of just being open and transparent with them throughout every step of it and letting them know what was happening, what was next, what we could expect. And, and really the financial part, because $150,000 loan for our company is a lot of money. And had we had to pay that back, we would have to make some really hard decisions on where we were going to cut back other expenses, whether it's investment in education and training or benefits, or how that was going to be handled within our organization. And so that was probably the biggest step that we had to overcome internally, is if for some reason it's deemed that we have to repay this loan of $150,000 that we did not benefit from, what were we going to do and how were we going to adjust internally within our organization to be able to compensate for that?
Brad, easier to get money for cybersecurity in your organization now? No? That didn't justify it? Are there other questions from the audience?
My name is Travis Kroger with Bowen and Associates in Sioux Falls. I like the old saying, you don't know what you don't know. I learn every day, it's part of my job. Each of you, what's your biggest takeaway from 2021 in the cyber world? Like, what's that one cool fact that you want to share with everybody, scream it from the mountaintops, that you think most people don't have any clue about?
I'm the least educated person up here on cybersecurity. So for me, what was shocking early on is when I called to report the identity theft. The cases of identity theft had increased in the last half of 2020 by, I think the number was like 118%. There was a huge spike in identity theft cases because of COVID. And the government funding and unemployment just amplified that and ramped it up exponentially. That was a huge shock to me. I did not expect that. It was reassuring to know I wasn't the only one, but it was really shocking to know that had amped up quite so much. And I just think in general, we are going to see and feel more and more. We're not protected in Sioux Falls, South Dakota from cyber attacks.
So the biggest, if you want to call it aha, or just kind of realization, was that there's so much of this that isn't a technology game. And being a technologist, it was the primary thought, kind of historically, of, well, we need to get this new tool, or we need to get this training for our tech staff to be able to prevent this. Going through this, the operational side awareness is a bigger deal than I would have ever given credit. So those conversations that are just non-technical went a really, really long way, and I wouldn't have predicted that, say, a year ago.
I would think that it's something that Katie said earlier. I mean, I've sat through these forums before, and the comparison to the Wild West and it not being the Wild West, the level of sophistication that these groups are now going into, they are businesses. And I've only recently heard folks start talking about that this is a real business model. In the SWOT analysis, this is a strategic threat to your companies at every level. And so I think that's the biggest takeaway from 2020 to 2021 is the level of sophistication is increasing.
And for me, it's a constant sharing and just kind of telling the story of your information is out there, whether you are posting it on social media, on LinkedIn, whether it's in news articles or it's a part of a data breach, your information is already out there, and these threat actors are heavily using that information to focus their campaigns on any organization, so that they'll, just kind of spray attack organizations to see who will just be that person to click the button or get in. But then once they're in, they are heavily investigating, whether through files that they've gotten from your organization. I actually saw a cyber insurance policy posted on a dark website where the negotiators said, we have your cyber insurance policy. We see that you have a $1 million policy here. And some of these things are publicly available too. This one wasn't. But they say, so we're going to start negotiations at $1 million, and we're not going to budge from that. So they are heavily researching, as we've said numerous times, heavily organized, intelligent, and a lot of that information is already out there. So just knowing and being prepared for that, as well as understanding like what you post really does have a big impact. So working with marketing, I work with law enforcement constantly as they're posting their new police classes and stuff too, and say, hey, don't always post where they went to high school, because then I can identify who their parents were, their friends, all of these other groups. That's being heavily used for any person, any organization.
Any other burning questions out there? Yes. If you'll introduce yourself, please.
My name's Mary. I'm an accountant here in Sioux Falls, so I'm just going to dumb this down to some really easy yes/no questions. First is, have you personally frozen your credit, and how? And then secondly, if you're using I think Karina mentioned Liberty dot something. Are you using a place like that, or do you feel like that puts all your information in another place that can just get hacked? And if you are using them, who are you using?
For me, I do not currently have my credit frozen, although I have in the past, but my husband and I are going through a remodel right now, so it's a little hard to do. But we also are, both my husband and I are a part of the Office of Personnel Management, OPM breach from several years ago, big military database breach. We heavily monitor our credit. I use the knowledge that I have to monitor more than most people, and I do it myself. But we do also use some tools, some credit monitoring services.
Yes to the first. Credit bureaus are frozen, although I just learned today that there's a fourth credit bureau, so I need to look into that one. That's news to me, so thank you. I'm learning stuff here. I don't have, me personally, a LifeLock or ID Locker a subscription. My wife does because she was part of the OPM breach as well. So.
Yes and yes and yes. My credit is frozen and has been since January. It was not prior to that. And Liberty ID is what I have been using, but there is, LifeLock is out there. There's a lot of really good organizations out there that do it. And I do have credit monitoring through that as well. And then I also have credit monitoring through one of my credit cards.
So I don't have my credit locked, but we heavily monitor credit reports. We have thresholds set at our bank. There's a number of different things that our phones are lighting up all day long about what's happening with our financial. But then we also, through that insurance policy that we have, it also has a identification theft portion of that as well. That is kind of looking at the black market and looking at dark web to figure out if my name's showing up or my social showing up anywhere. So that's an additional level of monitoring we've also done.
The other thing that I did learn this year, because of the increase in identity theft, everybody can get a free credit report on a weekly basis, whereas before you could get them on an annual basis. You can now actually get and download and review your credit report on a weekly basis. So I would encourage you, if you haven't pulled a credit report or looked at your credit report recently, to take that step as well.
And another thought on that, if you have children or a dependent adult that you are caring for, lock theirs as well. Don't just think about yours.
All right, we're going to do the one takeaway, the one thing that everyone in the room can go back to their desk and their computer and do today. We'll start with, well, a couple of you started.
I've already given
Yeah,
mine.
give it again. We all have to hear things multiple times.
Okay, I said go back and plan the plan. Make sure that you start writing down what your actual plan is for who you're going to make that first phone call to. What does that look like in your incident response?
Mine would be share your story. If you do have an incident that happens to you, don't be embarrassed about it, because it's happening more often than you know. Here locally, I've worked with several business owners who've gone through extortion through social media, and it's been highly embarrassing extortion campaigns, but it's happening everywhere, and so share those to help prevent it, because you can't prevent it if we don't know about it.
And I'm going to find somebody to have on retainer in the event. something happens again.
So I would have said have a plan, but we've already covered that one. So if you have a plan, do a tabletop exercise and walk through that with your core team that's going to end up making decisions.
Perfect. Let's give them a hand. And I want to emphasize what Katie said. Karina and Brad, thank you so much for sharing your stories. That takes courage, and we deeply appreciate that you're willing to share your experiences so we can all learn. And then on behalf of SDN, I want to thank Jesse Schmidt and the Better Business Bureau, because SDN loves doing this event with them. It always turns out to be one of the better cybersecurity events that I get to attend in the year, just always come away with information we can use immediately. So I'm going to turn back to Jesse.
Thank you, Vernon. Again, I just can't. Let's have another round of applause for these folks. As much as I'd like to go home and get underneath my covers and not crawl out, I know I got a lot of things to do today. So again, there are some great takeaways. And Theron, thanks for adding that about your children. I can tell you that at the Better Business Bureau, that's something that we see happen pretty regularly, is that young people's credit is fresh and isn't marred. So oftentimes it's family members that will steal their Social Security numbers and their information. And so yes, if you have children, go freeze their credit, run, not walk, to make sure that that happens. But again, thank you everybody. Of course, thanks to SDN, we couldn't do this without them. Thank you to Think3D for allowing us to really up our level today. And so again, thank you all for coming, and share this information far and wide, because we don't get anywhere if we take the crawl under the covers approach as much as we would like to. So thank you all. Have a great day, and thanks for coming.